In 2004, at the Republican National Convention, the New York police spied illegally on anti-war protesters. There were also reports that the FBI was illegally spying on other nonviolent groups of Americans, meeting in churches and in Quaker houses of worship.
State police documents obtained by the ACLU reveal that undercover cops infiltrated local groups opposed to the death penalty and the war.
The internal documents show that nearly 36 times, undercover state police officers covertly took part in protests, like this one in November of 2005.
Sports writer David Zirin was part of a group that successfully pushed for a moratorium on the death penalty in the state of Maryland. What he didn't know was that the state police had sent undercover agents to monitor this group of American citizens' legal activities.
In the meetings was somebody who was known to us as Lucy. And Lucy would sit there. She was, the word that keeps coming to mind was peppy. Like she would sit there with a big smile on her face and ask lots of questions and take notes. It was always the most basic questions like, wow, why are we doing this? Why about, like the kind of questions that you're happy that somebody who's new to a group asks.
And he found out later that it was Lucy who was the spy.
It's obvious that they made the conclusion that nothing illegal was going on here, and yet they continued to monitor our email list. They continued to come to our meetings. That's the thing that's so upsetting about this, is that this idea that some people deserve to be watched and some people don't. People should ask that question about, well, where is my Homeland Security money going? Is it actually being used to keep us safer, or is it being used to stifle dissent?
We know that when you go to your anti-war group or your environmental group, there may well be someone there, and this is right out of COINTELPRO. We did this in the 60s and 70s until there were laws against it. Congress took action. Those have been undone. But in your local group, there's going to be some really, think about that really troublesome person who's always trying to start a fight. You know, this is a tactic to send agents in who look and dress like ordinary citizens, activists, but who are there to cause trouble, to make it difficult to move forward, to break up the group, to smear people. Surveillance and infiltration. It's the way the state messes with people's minds to make them psychologically unwilling to stand up for themselves or even trust their own reality. It's a psychological pressure point and not just a tactical one.
The Bush administration says a president's warfighting powers include authority to detain enemy combatants, even when they're U.S. citizens.
The next thing is to arbitrarily detain and release citizens. And again, this is an intimidation tactic. Pinochet did it. The National Socialists did it. Do you guys remember James Yee? Chaplain James Yee, a U.S. citizen, was assigned to Guantanamo Bay. He dared to speak up against the mistreatment he saw there of the prisoners.
I raised concerns about the abuses that were occurring, how specifically religion was being used as a weapon to try and break these individuals.
And then a troubling incident occurred.
Captain James Yee was arrested after he was caught with classified documents and diagrams.
Chaplain James Yee was returning from service in Guantanamo. As he got off the plane in Florida, he was detained.
Much of what they were looking at were articles that I had printed off the internet. I had been enrolled in a master's degree program, and I was doing a research paper on the Syrian president. Most immediately thereafter, I was then accused of being a terrorist spy and thrown in prison. I was locked away in a single solitary cell in Charleston, South Carolina, the very same facility where the U.S. government holds what they term U.S. citizen enemy combatants. I was worried that I was going to be falsely convicted of these heinous crimes and then wrongfully put to death, whether by the electric chair or some other means.
James Yee was held in solitary confinement for 76 days. But now this guy is out of prison, and every time he crosses a border, they take him and hold him and release him.
My life would be forever affected by the constant surveillance that the American government puts on its U.S. citizens.
Maher Arar, software engineer. Maher Arar, a Canadian citizen, had been vacationing with his family in Tunisia. As they were flying home, he was taken at the airport and separated from them.
I was pulled aside by immigration officials. They took my fingerprints, my photos. All of a sudden, FBI officials came and started interrogating me.
He was stopped at JFK, pulled out of line, interrogated all day, and then taken to the Metropolitan Detention Center in New York.
This father of two was held in solitary confinement for 2 weeks.
He repeatedly asks for his attorney. He tells them he'll be tortured in Syria. He tells them he doesn't want to go to Syria.
He was then taken via Jordan to Syria,
where he is detained for a year.
There was no light in there. It was 3 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and 7 feet high. It was a torture chamber.
He was whipped with an electrical cable. He was interrogated for up to 18 hours a day.
First time they beat me, I was in the chair. He showed me the cable, and he started beating me all over my body.
No one knew for the first 2 weeks in Syria where he had been removed because the U.S. government wouldn't tell people.
Maher Arar was kept in a grave-like cell and tortured for over 10 months. He was then released, and no charges were ever filed against him.
I still have fears. I don't take the plane anymore. I don't fly. I have not been able to find a job. They ruined my life. They ruined my life.
The idea that the president could simply pick up any person in the world and hold them in an offshore prison, hold them forever, is really a shock. And that goes against everything that a legal system, or that a democracy, or that a republic ever stood for.
Wir haben ein deutsches Theater, einen deutschen Film, eine deutsche Presse, ein deutsches Schrifttum, eine deutsche bildende Kunst und einen deutschen Rundfunk.
The next thing that always happens, the seventh step, is the targeting of key individuals. Goebbels was so good at this. He systematically targeted people who were not in alignment with the regime. So you start to see key individuals, visible individuals, kind of singled out to be punished or have repercussions, career repercussions. You saw people like the Dixie Chicks.
The Chicks hit Travelin' Soldier went from #1 to oblivion in 2 weeks. Replacing it, Daryl Worley's Have You Forgotten, a pro-war song.
It wasn't a local type of thing where people, and there wasn't an aspect of that, but for the most part it was coming down from the top. You are not allowed to play the Dixie Chicks.
One random comment, they wished Bush wasn't from Texas. Next thing you know, Clear Channel, which has close ties to the White House, is making sure that radio stations are not playing their music.
We don't have a stage and a microphone. All we have is our checkbook when we go pay for the CDs and the tickets and the T-shirts and all the stuff we've paid too much money for.
And then, another one of these echoes, you hear about spontaneous CD burnings of Dixie Chicks CDs all over the South. And you know there's something funny going on with this because CDs don't burn.